Hello and welcome. Thank you for participating in Morehead at Home Skywatching, hosted by Morehead Planetarium and Science Center. My name is Amy Sale, and I'm an educator at Morehead. We're a unit of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, located on campus. We also work throughout the state through a number of outreach initiatives like our mobile lab vans, our summer camp programs, and the annual North Carolina Science Festival. Our mission is to help people better understand science, technology, and health, and we do this through engaging learning opportunities like this live virtual event. We're happy to have you here for our program today on Greek myths in the spring sky, and Nick will get us started.
Thanks so much, Amy. Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well this morning. We're excited that you're here with us for Morehead at Home Sky Watching. Today, we're talking about one of our favorite topics, and it seems to be one of the favorite topics of people that visit us at Morehead Planetarium and Science Center, Greek myths in the sky. So we are lucky that our spring skies here in late May, or even last month in April, or next month in June, they provide us with lots of neat ways to connect the sky above us right now to some of these stories that the ancient Greeks told many, many years ago. So we're excited to get going and get started. Before we begin, I want to tell you a couple of housekeeping things. If you have questions during this session, we want you to ask them, but the best way to ask them is to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question about one of the stories or about something we're looking at in the sky, don't hesitate to type it in. We will take some time at the end to try to answer all of those. So Q&A function right down there below you. Also, we're going to be using a program to help us simulate the sky called Stellarium. It's a free open source program. We've used it before in some of these sessions, but if you're joining us for the first time, or if you never caught that name in previous sessions, it's a really neat tool to kind of give us a flat screen planetarium. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a moment. So what I'm actually going to do for you is share my screen so you can see this flat screen planetarium. And I'll point out a couple of things for you so we can get oriented, because I know this might not look like the sky in your backyard. We're facing towards the south. You can kind of see this big red letter here. Our view might change throughout this session, so be ready for that. We also have a clock down here that tells us the date and time. That's pretty important because in the real world, we have to wait for 1 second to move by every second to move forward in time. But if you're using a program like Stellarium or planetarium software like we have at Morehead, you can actually control time. Last week, we had a whole session about how the sky is a time machine, but in a more literal sense, we can move time forward so that you can see what the sky would look like tonight from your viewpoint, hopefully. So all that being said, right now we're set at the current date and time. Today is the 26th of May, 2020, and it's a little after 10 a.m. So I told you we were going to talk all about Greek myths, but we had a poll question for you to kind of get our brains started this morning. It should pop up on the screen in just a minute. There it is. The question is, true or false? Of all the ancient civilizations, only people in Greece paid attention to the sky. So is it true that only the Greeks looked at the sky, or is it false that other people look at the sky? What do you think, Amy?
Oh, I got a pretty firm opinion on this one. I'll see what people say. And while we're waiting, several questions are coming in. Thank you. Those of you who have started writing questions there. Nick, we got one about how we decide when we're using Stellarium whether to show a view with trees and land, and sometimes we show the ocean. Did you want to comment on that? Why sometimes we choose one versus the other?
Sure. So lately you might have noticed your view in Stellarium was a little different. We use trees and land when the things that we're looking at are usually higher up in the sky. The reason that in the past we've used the ocean view is because we were looking for specific planets that were actually really close to the horizon from our viewpoint. So the horizon is that place where the sky meets the ground. So you might notice that right now on your screen, if you're looking over here in the western sky near the horizon, there's a big tree in the way. And for us here in North Carolina, that's pretty realistic. If you're stargazing in your backyard, there might be a big tree in the way. Well, with a software like Stellarium, we can change how it looks. And when we wanted to show you Venus and Mercury in particular, we needed to get that tree out of the way. Great question. Ooh, and we have some results.
Okay, it looks like most people say that it's false, that not only people in ancient Greece have paid attention to the sky. And yeah, I would say, Nick, probably everyone has paid attention to the sky. Everybody who's had access to it. So, but today we'll focus just on a few stories that originate or have been told in ancient Greece. And I do want to mention there are multiple versions of these stories. There's no one right version. So when we tell you a story, it might sound familiar to you, but it might be different from a version that you know.
Yeah, and I actually think that's a really beautiful thing. No matter where you're from on the earth, people look up at the sky and tell stories. They might not all be in the same language, but it's something we all share together. So even if the story that you hear today is a little bit different than the version I think that's pretty cool. So with all of that said, I think we're ready to see some stars and get started with our stories. So what I'm going to do first is have a sunset, and then I'm going to move our view a little bit. So what I want y'all to pay attention to now is how that clock down here, kind of at the bottom of your screen, is starting to speed up, and what that means for objects in the sky. You notice that we're moving a lot faster than we would in the real world. And there are two objects that you can see here in the daytime. The brightest one is the sun, our star, but you might also notice that the moon is labeled. So if you have a clear sky today and a keen eye, you might be able to catch that moon as well. So it is up there in our daytime sky sometimes. So you notice it's getting later. The sun is going to set. We get a nice glow, some of those fun sunset colors, and a look at a nice evening sky. So this is the sky at about 9:40 p.m. So I know that's getting close to some of our bedtimes, but that's kind of what happens as we get into the summertime. We have a pretty late view of a dark sky as our sunset time gets later. What I'm going to do for us might kind of shake things up a little bit. I told you we were facing the south. I actually want to spin us around so that we can face north. And that's because we're going to be focusing on a couple of shapes in the sky that you can't see super well in this view of the south. So in Stellarium, it's as easy as dragging your screen around and repositioning us. So I know that can be kind of dizzying, but in the real world, it's kind of like just spinning around so that you're facing a new direction. And to one of our earlier points, you might even see the label of planet Mercury there. You notice there's a big tree in the way. So we're not going to focus too much on Mercury right now. What we are going to focus on is a shape that many of you probably know, and you might have even found this on your own outside before. It's a shape in the sky called the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper has many stories about it, whether it's Greek mythology or tales from right here in the American South. The Big Dipper, to our eyes, looks like a big soup spoon that you dip into a pot of soup. So it is made of 7 bright stars. Maybe you can look on your screen and find 7 bright stars that make a shape of a big spoon, but I'm actually going to help you out. It's almost right in the middle of our screen right now, this area, and it's upside down to our current view. So the Big Dipper's handle has 3 stars, 1, 2, 3, and 4 stars in its bowl, 1, 2, 3, 4. And just like that, we are able to kind of outline a shape. Now you notice when I bring up the connect the dot lines, these constellation lines, of course you can't see the lines up there in space, but we use them to make sense of our sky and organize things. You notice that more than just those 7 stars are connected. We'll talk about that in just a moment. What I wanted to do with the Big Dipper though is point us to another important shape in the sky. And by the way, we'll get to this in a minute, but this larger constellation, it's called Ursa Major. All right, that'll be important in a moment, and I won't spoil what it looks like for you quite yet. But what we're going to do is take the 2 stars opposite the handle of our Big Dipper. So it's these 2 bright ones here. They have really neat names. They're called Merak and Doobie. And this is one way to star hop your way to a very familiar star that hopefully you should be able to see in your sky tonight. We're going to move from Merak to Doobie, extend a line out into space, to the next brightest star. And as I click on it, you might notice some information comes up about it. It is called Polaris. Polaris has another name. More commonly, we know it as the North Star, but Polaris is its official name. And the North Star, or Polaris, is the tail of the Little Dipper, which you see here also has the name Ursa Minor. So by finding those 7 bright stars in the Big Dipper, you use your 2 pointer stars, you can find your way to the North Star. And you notice it's hanging out right above North. That's the unique thing about it. As we move through the night, the other stars appear to move throughout the sky because our Earth is moving. But the North Star stays in just about the same place because the North Pole of our Earth is pointed right at it. So all that being said, I want to pass things over to Amy because I want to hear a little bit about how these 2 shapes are connected to Greek myths.
Okay, so our story starts with Zeus, king of the Greek gods. He was married to a woman, Hera, and Zeus came down to earth one day and was walking through the forest, and he saw a young woman named Callisto. Now, Callisto was a hunter. She liked to hunt with a group of other women hunters, and she was very good at it. And I guess Zeus was really impressed by her skill at hunting, and I think Callisto was also quite beautiful to him as well, and they ended up having a baby together. And Callisto named her baby boy Arcus. Now, you'll recall, Zeus was married. Hera, the goddess, did not appreciate Callisto and this baby, Arcus. So Hera decided to turn Callisto into a bear. So now Callisto had fearsome claws and she had a short, stumpy tail. And she had a problem because if you're a bear, you can't hang out with your hunter friends. So Callisto had to hide. And in the meantime, her baby boy Arcus grew up into a young man and he became a hunter. Now Callisto really had a problem because Arcus, her boy, came out to the forest one day with his bow and his arrow, and he saw his mother, but he didn't know it was his mother. They hadn't seen each other since he was a baby. And so Callisto, seeing Arcus for the first time in many years, she was delighted. She reared back on her hind legs and she reached out with those big claws, thinking she would embrace him. But of course, what Arcus saw was a scary bear. So he took his bow and his arrow and he was about to let that arrow fly. He was about to kill his own mother when Zeus realized what was happening, and he quickly turned Arcus into a bear. And now mother and son are both bears, and Zeus grabbed them by their short, stumpy tails, and he lassoed them into the sky. And as he lassoed them into the sky, swinging them around and around, their tails got longer and longer and longer. And there they are together, mother and son, Ursa Major, the big bear, with her son, Ursa Minor, the little bear, in the sky where they are safe again.
I love that story. Yeah, one of the questions we always get is, why do those bears have big, long tails? And, you know, if we were to make up a myth right now, maybe here in North Carolina, this would be the myth of the squirrels in the sky or something like that with their big, long tails. But maybe Zeus tossing them up there is a pretty good explanation.
And some of you may know there's the Roman equivalents of Zeus and Hera are Jupiter and Juno. And the word Jupiter probably sounds familiar to you. So Jupiter, king of the Roman gods. Jupiter is also the name of the king of the planets in our solar system. The planet Jupiter is named for the Roman god Jupiter. And there is a spacecraft, Juno, that was launched to the planet Jupiter several years ago and is now in orbit around it. There are no people on this spacecraft. But it's a really appropriate name for a spacecraft because Juno, the goddess, in the mythology stories, was said to be able to study Jupiter. So Jupiter would veil himself in clouds to hide his mischief. But Juno was said to be able to peer through the clouds and discover Jupiter's true nature, just like Juno, the spacecraft, can peer through Jupiter, the planet's clouds, and discover its true nature. And we've been learning a lot about the planet Jupiter because of the spacecraft Juno.
Absolutely. And I think there's still more to come, more data that it's going to observe around the planet Jupiter. It's doing really fun things like studying what exactly all of those clouds are made of. It's finding new storms on Jupiter. You might have heard of the Great Red Spot before. Well, part of Juno's mission is to pinpoint and understand those types of storms. It's studying magnetic fields, and it's even studying some of Jupiter's moons. So maybe Juno is checking up on some of those other folks around Jupiter as well. Okay, well, that was our northern view of the sky. We have a couple of other stories to tell you, but that involves moving one more time. So if that's okay with you, Amy, I'm actually going to swing our sky back to a southern view.
Let's do it.
Here we go. You see, I'm kind of just pulling my screen here, and it's not perfect, but you can see we're facing essentially towards the south. And now you kind of see why we did that. You can't even see Ursa Minor from this southern view. But there are some other fun constellations that tie into these stories that we can find. So where should we head first?
Oh gosh, why don't we use the Big Dipper again, but rather than using Merak and Doobie, the pointer stars, to get to Polaris, the North Star, and the Little Dipper and the Little Bear, why don't we use that bear's tail, that handle of the Big Dipper, and do some curving off that handle.
Yeah, that's a good plan. We can arc with the tail of the bear or the handle of the dipper, either way you see it, to a bright star called Arcturus. And Arcturus is the brightest star in a constellation called Bootes. And I don't know if you can kind of make out that picture right there. To me, this shape kind of looks like an ice cream cone or a necktie or something like that. But those ancient Greeks, they saw it as a herdsman right here. Okay, so we've arced our way to Arcturus.
Let's
Any
keep
other
going.
cast members we need to find here?
Yeah, let's speed on.
Yeah. So we're doing a technique called star hopping, which is a way to find the bright stars and move your way through the sky to new shapes. So we're going to star hop right from Arcturus and speed on to Spica. Spica is the brightest star in the constellation of Virgo, the maiden. So there's another one of our cast.
Okay,
And
let's keep going.
yeah, keep going. Why not? So you see we're kind of following this line, Arcturus to Spica. Here we can move over to a constellation called Corvus. Maybe we can curve to Corvus the Crow. And we can even move further and hop to Hydra. Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah, biggest of the 88 constellations. And Nick, are you able to we have one really important character to the right of Corvus on the back of Hydra.
Oh, sure, we sure do. I always forget about this one.
Yeah, it's hard to see. I've seen it from Jordan Lake, but you do need pretty good conditions to be able to see it. The stars are kind of faint. What do you think that looks like? I think it looks like a cup.
Yeah, looks like a cup to me.
Okay, I've got a story for you. Now the story is going to focus on those last three that we just looked at: Corvus the Crow or the Raven, Crater the Cup, and Hydra, who, as you can see, is a snake. And in this story, she's a water snake. So this is how it goes. The god Apollo sent Corvus the Crow to fetch him a cup of spring water. Well, of course, you do what the gods say. So Corvus immediately went off to get the cup of water. But on the way, he got a little distracted. There was this fig tree, and there was this just perfect, luscious fig. He just knew it was going to be luscious once it ripened. And that took a few days. But boy, was that fig tasty. And then he quickly got the water, went back to Apollo, and felt like he needed to make up an excuse for why it took so long to get the water. So thinking quickly, he said, there was this water snake, and that was the problem. That's what took so long. Well, Apollo, he could see all. Also, he noticed that Corvus's belly was a little bloated from eating the fig, and he had fig juice on his feathers. So Apollo punished Corvus by placing him into the sky, where you see him here. Notice that he's right next to Crater the Cup, and that cup is tilted tantalizingly right in his direction, but he will never get to sip even a little bit of that water because Crater is guarded by Hydra, the water snake. There's a lesson in there, I think, Nick. Do not lie to Apollo.
Yeah, lying to the Greek gods never gets you in a good place, I think. Awesome. That's another great one. That's one that I actually only heard recently, so I'm always excited to hear that from Amy. Okay. There are more stories to be told. You might kind of notice in this area kind of looks like there's an empty spot here amongst all of our constellations. Well, never fear, we can find another pretty common shape by using a liquid of another type, water, again, in our Big Dipper. So kind of bring your attention back up here to the Dipper. Instead of using the handle or using the pointer stars, let's fill up this bowl of the Big Dipper. It is a pretty ancient constellation, so it's going to leak onto the back of a shape that some of us might know, and I'll just illuminate it here for us now. Leo the Lion. So I think we have another story that kind of relates a couple of other objects here in this area.
Yeah, can we show them? There's a really dim constellation.
Yeah, let me see if I can click on the right one. It's so dim that I always have a hard time finding it. Maybe.
Yeah, and that's actually part of the story. Oh, good job. That looks like Cancer the Crab. Okay, are we ready?
Yes.
Okay, so, we need one more. Can we get one more constellation? Can you find us Hercules? Oh, there he is. Okay, so Hercules is kind of a Roman mythology thing. In Greek mythology, it's Heracles, but I'm gonna call him Hercules in this story because that's the name that we recognize for the constellation. So Hercules, you all might know, is supposed to be this really strong man. Well, he was the son of Zeus. So he had a god for a father. And Hera, though, Zeus's wife, did not appreciate the fact that Hercules existed because somebody else was his mother, not Hera. And so she just decided to make his life absolute trouble. So even when Hercules was just a baby, she sent 2 snakes to his crib. But Hercules was so strong, he wrung the snakes' necks like they were toys. So he took care of that problem. And then later on, Hercules was doing his 12 labors, or his Herculean tasks, you might say. And he had to battle all these animals. And one of the animals he had to battle was a lion. And it's identified with Leo the lion over there, if you see it underneath Ursa Major, the big bear. And according to one Greek story, this lion had lived in the sky and it descended to earth like a shooting star. And then it just rampaged through the countryside, ransacking the countryside, big problem. But Hercules managed to strangle the lion with his bare hands. And then Zeus returned the lion back to the sky, where you see it here as the constellation Leo. And then according to another story, Hercules, when he was again busy battling animals as part of his Herculean tasks, he had to battle a snake, Hydra. So in this story, Hydra has 9 heads, and when one head would get cut off, 2 heads would grow in its place. So try to imagine battling a snake with 9 heads. Every time you cut off one, 2 grow. Well, Hercules figured out that if he could take a burning tree stump and he could use it to scorch the place where he had cut one head off, he could keep 2 heads from growing back. And so he managed to scorch off all the heads and kill Hydra. But while he was doing this, Hera decided to make his life difficult and sent this tiny little crab, Cancer, to bother him. But Hercules managed to trample the crab under his feet. And Hera put the crab into the sky, but because it had failed to accomplish its task of messing up Hercules, she failed to mark it with any bright stars. And that, according to the Greek story, is why Cancer the crab is so hard to find in the sky. It has only dim stars.
I love that connection. So as you can see, almost every part of the sky has its own story to tell. We could probably sit here for 2 hours and tell you stories about things all around us, but we did want to leave a little bit of time for your questions. So before we get to those, I want to show you one last thing. You notice there are still some stars in the sky that haven't been connected. The dots aren't connected to all of them. I want to show you that every part of the sky does have its own story to tell, and kind of the best way to do that is to bring up all the constellations. You notice that there are a bunch of them we did not get to in our stories, but as we move time, every single part of the sky has its own story. And what I've brought up here are these red boundaries. They show us officially where the constellations are. Basically, even if you're not part of one of these connect the dot lines, you can still have your own story and be part of a story. And you notice that as we move through the night, they change. And maybe that'll inspire you to do a little bit of mythological research of your own. Maybe you can find your favorite version of some of these stories that we've told and connect it to something you see later at night or earlier in the morning. Is one of my very favorite things to do, because no matter where you look up there, there's a story related to it.
Oh, and Nick, I see that it looks like a couple of planets just rose. They almost look blurred together. They look like they're practically on top of each other.
Yeah, I sped us up another notch. By the way, friends, we're at about 2 a.m. So I know the screen's kind of moving in a bit of a funny way there, probably because of all the constellations loaded up. But Amy's right. If you can pick it out amongst all of these images, there are 3 planets that you can see in the early morning or late at night, depending on how you think about it. So Jupiter, Saturn, and over here in Aquarius, we have Mars.
And I saw that somebody had asked a question asking about the biggest planet in our solar system. And in fact, that is Jupiter, appropriate, king of the Roman gods, associated with Zeus, king of the Greek gods. So Jupiter is the biggest, although not the brightest appearing planet to us. That's actually Venus. Venus is relatively close to us. It's relatively close to the sun, so it's going to appear very bright. It's got this highly reflective cloud cover. Unfortunately, right now is not a great time to see Venus. You'll notice we didn't point it out, and that's because it's roughly in line of sight with the sun right now. It had been in our evening sky for a while, but it's now going to be lost in the glare of the sun for a little while. And then we also picked up Mars. Yeah. And Nick, it looks like we're pulling an all-nighter here.
I know, you got a true Morehead Planetarium and Science Center all-nighter here, friends. You notice that something else is being lost in the glow of the sun. It's all the constellations. They're still up there. The stars still exist. We just can't see them because that sun's light is so bright. So I'm sure you have lots of questions about some of these things that have popped up on the screen. So let's take a moment or two to talk about some of your questions. I'm gonna actually stop sharing. And Amy, are there any of them in particular that you'd like to check out?
There are many good ones, and we're not going to be able to get to all of these. Fig asks, is there a story behind all of them? There are many stories behind many of the constellations. Some of them, I will say, don't really have much of a story because some of the constellations that are best visible from the southern hemisphere are named after scientific instruments. There's like horologium, the clock, and telescopium, the telescope, and so on. And there's probably no good stories associated with those. But the constellations that were named that are older tend to have some really great stories. And
oh, I remember one thing, Amy. We actually had one more question for them. I know that we're in the middle of answering our questions. We had one more poll question for you folks that are watching.
Yeah.
And we almost forgot, because we were curious about something. We know that many of you are watching in households, maybe with more than one person. So if you don't mind, before we get to a couple more questions, we want to see how many people in your household are watching this program, our Morehead at Home session, on your screen. If it's 1, you can say just me. If it's 2, 3, 4, 5 plus, just put your votes in there real quick, because we're just kind of curious exactly how many people are joining us each Tuesday and Thursday.
Okay, and we're just going to leave this question up until the very end. So just answer it as soon as you can, and we'll be able to take a look at that later. So thank you. Oh, Nick, we have so many things. Let's see what we can get to. Are you ready to tackle actually the very first question that came in is super relevant to something going on this week. Mary asks, how many people will be on the rocket going to the International Space Station tomorrow? And did any of those people train at the planetarium, at Morehead Planetarium?
That's a great question. So if you haven't heard the news, NASA and SpaceX are launching human beings, 2 of them, astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken, up to the International Space Station tomorrow from Florida. And that's really special for a number of reasons. It's the first time in about 10 years and 9.5 years since astronauts have gone to the ISS from the United States. And it's also the first time humans are going to be riding on the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket with the Dragon capsule. So it's a day of firsts, and it's really exciting because it's going to help us lead to future missions, and I'm sure the astronauts are going to have a lot of fun on their trip up. But to answer your question, those 2 astronauts, Colonel Hurley and Colonel Behnken, they did not train at Morehead Planetarium and Science Center. They've had really great careers as astronauts. They flew on the space shuttle missions between 2008 and 2011, which I know sounds like a really long time ago, but it's pretty recent as far as astronauts go. And we did train 62 astronauts at Morehead Planetarium, but not those two. So I wish we could claim them. Maybe some of you watching that are going to become astronauts someday, we can claim you when you're an astronaut. But the Morehead training program ended before these guys came along.
And if you do want to learn more about the astronauts trained at Morehead Planetarium, they do include some really famous people like Neil Armstrong, first person to walk on the moon. He did train at Morehead Planetarium. He actually put in the most hours of training of all the 62 astronauts that trained at Morehead Planetarium. Our colleague Meteor Mike will be presenting on Thursday, 10 a.m. live. We'll be talking a little bit about this launch to the International Space Station, and then Meteor Mike will talk to us about what the astronauts who trained at Morehead Planetarium learned.
Yeah, so it's going to be a really, really fun session on Thursday. The launch itself, I forgot to tell you, is happening tomorrow. The slated time is 4:33 p.m. So the weather could change that, but tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday, the 27th, is when this rocket is supposed to go up. So definitely keep up with that. I know we're just about out of time. I flagged one more question that I wanted to answer from Daniel. Daniel said, if Polaris is the North Star, what is Sirius? Sirius is the brightest star in our night sky, but it is not the North Star. So when we were in our original south view there in Stellarium, you might have noticed it. Very, very bright star, but it's just that, a very bright star that's the brightest one we can see in our night sky until it sets as we get a little bit further into the summer. So another very famous one, but not to be confused with the North Star. That's a really great question.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Daniel. Thanks for everyone. I see tons of questions coming in, and we are out of time, but we do have the chat open. If you would like to put into the chat suggestions for future topics, we want to know what you're into. I see that somebody's asked an eclipse question, for example. I'd love for us to do a session just on eclipses. If you have other ideas of things you'd like us to talk about, or if you have any feedback for us, please type that into the chat. We'll leave that open. We've also left open that poll, so go ahead and answer that about how many people are watching. And we will look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. If you want to keep up with what Morehead's doing during this time at home, please check out our website, www.moreheadplanetarium.org, and look for the Morehead at Home page. There'll be a big list of things that we're doing, like virtual planetarium shows, these sky watching sessions, and more. You can follow us on social media, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Our YouTube channel has virtual playlists, so there's a lot out there, and we just hope you'll kind of ride along with us on our journey through space. So enjoy the launch tomorrow, and we'll see you on Thursday.